My husband died 8 months ago. Last Tuesday, I heard him laugh from across a Tim Hortons, and I knocked my coffee straight off the table. I had driven down to Kingston the previous Friday, not for any particular reason. The way daughters sometimes call and say come, and mothers do. My daughter had a spare room and a patient heart, and grief, I had learned, does not ask permission before showing up in the spaces you thought you had organized for yourself. I had been managing. That is what I told people when they asked. Managing. It sounded true enough to pass. 8 months is long enough that you start to feel slightly guilty about not being worse. You learn the shape of the silence in your house. You find, carefully, that you can make coffee without someone else making it with you. You stop expecting to hear the garage door at 5:15. Tuesday morning, I went out before my daughter woke up. I had slept poorly and did not want to lie in the dark room with my thoughts any longer. The Tim Hortons on Princess Street was already filling up with the commuter crowd. I found a small table near the window, ordered a medium double, the same order I have placed since 1987, the same order I made on the morning I drove to the hospital where my mother died, the same order that means I am in the world and doing ordinary things, and sat with both hands around the cup and looked out at the street. I was not thinking about my husband. That was the strange part. For perhaps the first time in 8 months, I had made it to a Tuesday morning without his face arriving before the coffee was finished. Then I heard the laugh. It came from the far side of the room, low and slightly uneven, the kind that starts in the chest before it gets to the throat. My husband had always laughed that way, a little like he was trying to keep it quiet and couldn't quite manage. My body knew it before I did. My hand jerked sideways, and the cup went off the edge of the table entirely. I was on my feet before I had decided to stand. The man had his back to me. Dark jacket, the collar sitting slightly off on one side. My husband always carried his left shoulder high, and every collar did the same thing. He was speaking to someone at the counter and gestured with his left hand in a way that was not quite right, and I told myself that. I focused on that small wrongness as I crossed the room toward him anyway. Then I saw his wrist. He had pushed the jacket sleeve up to check his watch. Below the band, on the inside of his wrist, was the dark crescent birthmark I had known for 29 years. Shaped, we had always said, a little like a boat. He had hated the comparison because he hated boats. We had laughed about it on the dock at his brother's cottage, the summer we got engaged. I said his name. He turned slowly, and then he was facing me. The same face, the same lines around the eyes that had deepened through his 50s, the same slight crookedness to his nose from a break he got in a hockey game at 34, the same gray at his temples that had been spreading so quickly. The last few years I teased him that he would be silver by Christmas. His expression did not move. "I think you've got me confused with someone," he said. His voice was careful, polite. His voice. "No," I said, "I don't." He shook his head gently. "I'm sorry, I don't know you." I reached into my bag. My hands were steadier than they had any right to be. I pulled up a photo on my phone. The two of us at my daughter's place last Christmas, his arm around me, both of us squinting because she had set the timer wrong and the light came from the wrong direction. I held it up between us. He looked at the photo, just a fraction of a second too long before he looked away. "I've never seen that before." He stepped back, one careful step. "I'm sorry for whatever you're dealing with. I truly am." He turned and walked to the door. I stood there while a young woman came over with napkins for the spilled coffee and asked if I was okay in the voice people use when they are not sure whether to call someone. I watched the window. I watched him push through the door and walk across the parking lot and get into a car, a dark blue sedan I had never seen before, and pull out into traffic. I left money on the table and went after him. I don't know what I was thinking. I don't think thought was involved. I took a photo of his license plate as he pulled away. Then I got into my own car and drove after him. We went west along the lake. I stayed 4 or 5 car lengths back, close enough not to lose him at lights, far enough that I was probably only recognizable to him if he was already looking. We passed out of the commercial strip and into older residential streets, all brick and bare maples, the kind of neighborhood that had been there since the 50s. He slowed, turned onto a quieter street. I parked half a block away and watched. He pulled into the driveway of a 2-story house, older, with a covered porch and window boxes, with the dead stalks of last season still in them. Before he had finished lifting his bag from the back seat, the front door opened. A woman came out. I guessed mid to late 40s. Slim, dark hair up, wearing a cardigan over her work clothes like she had just gotten home herself. She walked toward him and took his arm as he reached the porch steps, and they went inside together with the ease of people who have done it 10,000 times. Then a girl appeared in the doorway. 15 or 16, with his dark brows and the exact shape of his jaw. She said something, and he turned to her, and the laugh came again. That chest laugh, the one I had heard from, across a Tim Hortons, and he put his arm around her shoulders, and the 3 of them disappeared inside. The door closed. I sat in the car. The March cold was working through the windows. At some point I realized I had been sitting there for over half an hour. I took pictures of the house, the address numbers, the woman's car, a backpack hanging over the porch railing that must have been the girl's. On the drive back to my daughter's, I did not play the radio. I needed the quiet. By the time I reached her building, I had arranged things into an order I could hold. What I had seen, what I knew for certain, and what I was going to do next. I had been a school librarian for 31 years. I knew how to separate what was verified from what was assumed. My daughter came home from work at 6. I made dinner. I waited until she had eaten, and then I told her I needed to make a phone call privately, and I went into the spare room and called my brother-in-law. He lives near Smiths Falls, about 2 hours west of Kingston. We had been close, the 3 of us, the way families sometimes are when they are small enough that everyone is necessary. He answered on the 3rd ring. He sounded like he had been asleep, though it was barely 8 o'clock. I said I needed to see him, as soon as possible, tomorrow morning. The pause before he agreed lasted several seconds too long. He arrived at 8 the next morning. I made him sit down at my daughter's kitchen table. I put my phone on the table with the record function running before he walked through the door. Not from any particular forethought, only from the instinct that told me I might need proof of whatever this conversation was. I showed him the photos from the parking lot, from the house on the quiet street, the man's face through the Tim Hortons window. My brother-in-law did not say anything for a long time. He was 61 years old, and I had known him since he was 19, and I had never seen him look the way he looked at that kitchen table. It was not surprise. It was older than surprise. It was the face of a man who has been carrying something heavy for a long time, in a space not built to hold it. "How long have you known?" I said, not a question. He put both hands flat on the table. "Since before July," he said. I want to say that broke something in me. But it didn't, not in that moment. I had already crossed into a place where breaking wasn't available. I simply sat there and listened. He had known about the second family for some time. My husband had told him a few years earlier, in the way men sometimes tell their brothers things they cannot tell their wives, expecting loyalty and receiving it. He had not approved. But he had stayed quiet. The audit notice from the Canada Revenue Agency had arrived last spring. My husband's contracting business had been running cash payments off the books for years. Unreported income, personal expenses filed as business costs, a few contracts that had existed in name only. When he learned the scope of what an audit would uncover, he understood the consequences. Penalties, possibly charges. The kind of thing that does not stay quiet in a small community. And he had a daughter in Kingston, 15 years old. He had been telling her mother for 12 years that the separation from his wife was complicated, that things were almost resolved. 12 years of almost. He panicked, and when my husband panicked, he organized. 2 months before July, he transferred the Rideau Lake cottage into my brother-in-law's name. A gift between brothers, the paperwork said. He closed our joint savings account under the pretense of switching institutions. He sold the truck privately and pocketed the cash. He moved money through a personal line of credit he had opened without telling me. Every action had a reasonable cover story. I had heard several of them and accepted them because I trusted him. Then, on a Sunday in July, he took the fishing boat out onto the St. Lawrence River near Brockville, left his wallet and phone in the boat, and staged an accident. My brother-in-law had picked him up at a secondary launch site 20 minutes away and driven him to Kingston. The OPP searched for 4 days. The river, as the officers who came to my door had carefully noted, does not always return what it takes. I sat with all of this. My brother-in-law was crying by the end, quietly, the way men his generation cry, barely, with his face very still and his eyes very bright. He said he had told himself I would be all right, that at least I would have the insurance money. An allowance from a lie. I had heard that reasoning before. It does not improve with repetition. I did not cry. I asked a few more practical questions. Where the cottage transfer documents had been filed, which branch held the line of credit, whether there was any written communication between them about the plan. He answered everything. I thanked him. He looked startled by that. I showed him to the door. Then I called my daughter into the kitchen and played her the recording. She did not say anything for a moment. Then she asked if I knew a lawyer. I said not yet. She said she did and picked up her phone. We drove to Ottawa the next morning. The lawyer was direct and unhurried and went through the recording and the photos with the same focused calm I imagine surgeons use. What you're describing, she said, is fraud, multiple charges, potentially, along with filing a false insurance claim and obstructing a police investigation. She made calls while we sat in the waiting room. By the end of the afternoon, the RCMP Financial Crimes Unit had been contacted and a file had been opened. I spent the next week and a half in my daughter's apartment, waiting, while other people did things I had no power to do myself. I slept badly. I went for long walks along the waterfront in the cold and did not think about much. On the 4th or 5th morning, very early, I sat at the kitchen table and cried, hard, for about 15 minutes, and then I made coffee and got dressed and went on. The investigators located him on a Friday. I did not go to Kingston. I had already said everything I needed to say without words by following him to that house on that quiet street, by sitting across from my brother-in-law with a phone recording everything. The arrest did not need me there. What I did do, a few days later, was ask the lawyer to contact the woman from the house. She agreed to meet me. We sat across from each other in a coffee shop on the east side of Kingston, and I looked at her face and understood immediately that she had not known. Not the real shape of things. She had believed what she had been told, the same way I had, just a different version of the same story, edited for a different audience. She had been building her life around a man who had decided neither of us would ever be allowed to see the whole picture. I told her the girl had done nothing wrong, that I hoped she would be all right. She thanked me quietly. We did not speak again after that. The cottage transfer was reversed. The insurance claim was withdrawn. The assets that could be traced were returned, where possible, to where they belonged. My brother-in-law accepted a plea arrangement and received a conditional sentence with financial restitution. We have not spoken since the morning at my daughter's kitchen table. I do not know if we will. My husband's case went to trial the following spring. I attended the first day and sat in the gallery where he could see me, and then I left at noon and did not return. I had seen enough. The outcome, my lawyer had said, was not uncertain. She was right. There is a particular kind of loss that does not have a clean name. When a person you loved dies honestly, grief is its own shape. Difficult, yes, but recognizable. Something the world has words for. When you discover they did not die at all, that the grief itself was a structure someone built around you deliberately, a room designed to keep you still and quiet and grateful for the wrong things. It is something else entirely. It is not grief, and it is not relief, and it is not rage, though it contains all three. It is closer to the feeling of stepping through what you believed was solid ground, and finding that nothing beneath your feet was ever what you were told. I have been trying to find words for it for months. I am not sure the words exist yet. I sold the cottage that summer. My daughter and I drove up together in May to look at it, and I stood on the dock and looked at the water and felt no particular desire to keep what was there. It had always been more his place than mine. I let it go. With part of the proceeds, my daughter and I drove to Cape Breton in June. We rented a small house near Ingonish for 10 days and slept with the window open and woke up to the sound of the Atlantic. I went for long walks in the early mornings while she slept. Out along the shore in the fog, alone in the way that feels like a choice rather than a condition. One morning I walked far enough that I could not see the house anymore, and I stood there for a while, and I cried, not for my husband, not for what he had done, but for the woman I had been before I heard that laugh, the one who had ordered her usual without thinking and sat by the window and for 10 whole minutes had not been thinking about grief at all. I let her go. She had already been gone longer than I knew. I joined a watercolor class in September at the Arts Center in Brockville. Every Tuesday evening. I had been meaning to take it up for 20 years. I am not particularly good at it yet. The instructor is patient about this. There is something I have come to value in being a beginner at something. In sitting with the discomfort of not knowing and doing it anyway, and watching something appear on the paper that was not there before. I no longer confuse patience with acceptance. I was patient for 29 years. I accepted things I should have questioned, believed stories I should have examined, stayed still inside a life that was being shaped around me without my knowledge. I do not want to be unkind to the woman I was. She was doing what she understood love to require. But understanding has its limits, and loyalty that is never questioned becomes something else over time. It becomes permission for the wrong people to decide what you are allowed to know about your own life. What I know now is this. The morning I heard that laugh and followed a stranger out of a Tim Hortons, something came back to life in me that had been quiet for a very long time. Not courage, exactly. Something simpler and more stubborn than courage. The refusal to stay in a room I had not chosen. I make my own coffee now, in my own kitchen, in the house that is mine and no one else's. I look out at the same street I have looked at for 19 years, and it looks different to me. Not better, not worse. Seen, fully and without apology, seen. That is what I would not trade for any version of the life I thought I had.